Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So first, imagine you buy a t-shirt when you are 20 years old and it fits you really well and it's a nice style that you like and it quickly becomes your favorite t-shirt. Well, what will the fate of that t-shirt be in the coming years when you're 25, 30, even beyond? Are you still going to wear it? Are you going to outgrow it because maybe your body changes and so it no longer fits? Or maybe just the style will change so you don't feel really that you want to wear it anymore. You just outgrow it in more ways than one. Well, I think that's a good way to think about political systems in history. Now, first, a disclaimer. In this video, I'm not going to advocate for any one form of government over another. It's really just to get us thinking about political systems, and particular monarchy, because when you think of monarchy, what comes to mind? Do you have a good opinion of that word? Or most likely you probably have a not so good opinion of that word. So I would say this negative view of monarchy is really influenced by the Enlightenment and the American, but more particularly in a global context, the French Revolution. Because even our concept of right wing and left wing only goes back to the French Revolution. And that whole paradigm that was created with the French Revolution was a rebellion against thousands of years of tradition. You know, the monarchies that were really the most natural form of government, definitely the most common for thousands of years. And with the Enlightenment and the French Revolution, we put the rights of man above other considerations. It was all about determining what man wanted to accomplish in this life according to his ideas about philosophy, statecraft, etc. So we're in this paradigm in which the liberty of the individual in a democratic republic is the norm in the Western world. But it's useful to think about this in terms of the cycles of history, because if we actually think about political systems and we think about democratic republics are very rare in history if we consider it. Even if we think about what many consider to be the origin of democracy, it only goes back to ancient Greece and really only ancient Athens, and that democracy, which still was very limited, only lasted, less than 100 years, I believe. So what really seems to happen in history is you go through these cycles, like the Roman Empire. First it was a kingdom, then it became a republic, then it became an empire, and then it fell. So we have to think about the rise and fall of political systems. Nothing is eternal, except, I would say, God. Nothing that is man-made is eternal, particularly. And so if we think about the United States of America today, I think we have a great system. It's incredible, actually, the way that the Founding Fathers, in a unique historical moment, came together to create such an intelligent system, well designed, with checks and balances. They were geniuses. But we have to ask ourselves 250 years later, is it working for us, or is it being abused? And I think the answers to those questions are clear. So then what do we do about it? Because if we think historically, nothing lasts forever, everything goes through evolutions. What are we evolving towards? So why do we have this negative perception of monarchy? As I said, it's really about this Enlightenment paradigm in which the rights of man come first, above all else. But it's interesting because we're also seeing kind of a return to religion, particularly among young people, because I saw something recently and it was saying how in the UK, like right now for young people, if you're 20 years old, your parents were atheists. Like you're already living in an atheist secular world. So something that has deep tradition, deep roots going back thousands of years, something that is transcendent is actually very appealing to young people. And so what we really have to think about is where are we going spiritually, culturally, and then wherever that is, the politics will follow from that. And if we acknowledge that our democracy has failed us in some ways, not because the system was bad, but because we were changed by it and we corrupted it, we really have to think about what is best for us in the long run. So, what are the pros and cons of monarchy and democracy? Well, with democracy, we could say the pros are that the people get to choose their government. The problem is, though, when you have absolute freedom of elections and everything, that allows the chance for people with not so great intentions to come into that system and to corrupt it, as we see with politicians who are working for the interests of so many different lobbies. I mean, think about your representative in the House of Representatives. Think of how many people are coming to his office, are asking for him to advocate for these issues, to vote on these. Like, how are we really represented? And that comes down to the two-party system, which I think we all think is broken, especially when, the parties seem to disagree on things, but then other things they're very united. For example, the debt. That is one thing that across Democratic and Republican presidencies has just continued to go up. And that actually brings us to the fact that democracy, the main con of democracy is that the pro is the people choose what they want. But the con is because the people choose what they want or think to want now, that could be really bad in the long run. Because if you don't have like a morally upright people thinking about future generations and their children, they're just going to do what's best for them in the moment, and that could bankrupt their children. That could make the fate of their children and grandchildren's lives something you wouldn't even want to imagine. I'm reading the Old Testament now, and it's just a constant story of the Israelites follow God, but then some of them stop doing that. They make sacrifices to other gods. They become morally corrupt. And what happens? Their land is given over to other people. And God even does it to them because he says, you weren't following me, so this is what happens. Like, this would not have happened if they stayed on the right track. But if we always just do what we want now in a democracy, that can be very dangerous for the future. And some people seem to turn the idea of democracy into kind of a quasi-deity, because now in secular society, if we have put the rights of man above the rights of the collective, the moral order, the transcendent order, God, so to speak, then, well, what happens? Man becomes... It all leads kind of to a subjectification. We deify the state, but without God. And that, honestly, that's what can lead to some of the most terrible things in history. If we think about Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, Maoist China, these governments rejected God, And the only reason they were able to do that is because first the people put their faith in man. And when you put your faith in man, and you don't think about the long-term future, you don't put your faith in God, then that can make you do evil things, because then you forget morality exists, or you openly deny morality, which is being done in many cases today. So, okay, democracy has its pros and cons. It's good for liberty in many ways, but maybe not long-term stability. What about the pros and cons of monarchy? I would say the biggest pro is stability. You know, if we think about monarchies, they are not kind of swayed by the winds of public opinion. Now, they do have to be accountable, though. A monarch must be accountable, otherwise he will lose the support of the people. And that's kind of what maintained balance for thousands of years. You know, the monarch would not oppress the people so much as to have them take away their support for him. But even also, the fact that I use the word oppress, it just shows that I was raised in kind of a democratic paradigm, because this idea that monarchies are more oppressive than democracies, I mean, it's questionable to say the least. But okay, what is the big con of monarchy? A bad monarch. So obviously, if you get someone who is not thinking about the long-term interest, or is thinking about his selfish personal interest, that is a huge problem. But what I would say to that is that we should think about is, you know, in a monarchy, you need one person who is morally upright, who is thinking about the best for his people. A democracy, you need 51% of the people to choose representatives that will do all of that. So that's what makes a democracy a bit more prone to corruption. You know, a king could be corrupted in theory, but it's less likely, unless maybe he's weaker than the other powers around him, such as bigger governments, more powerful states. So, anyway, I'm going to bring this to a close by kind of having us think about monarchy in the USA. You know, we had these No Kings protests, I believe, in the US, where they were claiming, you know, Donald Trump is acting like a monarch, and, you know, the US, we don't want a king, things like that. But my question is, why don't we want kings? That's not me saying I want a king, but I'm just saying, why don't we? And when it really comes down to it, it's we want what we want when we want it. And if we think about that as a governing philosophy expressed in a democratic republic, well, that's how you get the fall of empires. It's when you vote in the interests of now against the interests of the future. You know, if we say what you want about Xi Jinping of China, about Vladimir Putin of Russia, or, yeah, I mean, most governments, I would say, are de facto monarchies these days, even if it seems like they're not, or they're oligarchies. When you think about China, Russia, they don't have the problem of, you know, civil conflict where people are out in the streets, you know, clamoring for their rights. Now, that's not to say that these governments aren't oppressive. Yes, they're doing things that are not correct. But they're not threatened, like, no one ever talks about civil war in China or civil war in Russia, things like this. Whereas in the US, we've really, because we have such a free society, that allows all these different media networks to cater to the interests of increasingly extreme views on both sides. And that's a big problem. So we need to think, what are we going towards? Are we going towards what we want now, in this moment, selfishly considering the present? Or do we want to think about transcendence? Do we want to think about morality again? Do we want to think, like, not will this political decision benefit my party or me or even my voters? Like, will it benefit the moral order of the universe? And that's where I think we could learn a little bit from Monarchy, is to imagine a king who kneels down before God. Because our politicians kneel down before their donors, our politicians kneel down before us as if we are God. And actually, most of all, I would say they kneel down in front of the mirror because they view themselves as, in many cases, above everything else. It's pure egoism. And that's what I want to dispel, this myth that monarchy is somehow cult of personality or based on ego. No, monarchy worked in Europe for thousands of years, or at least over 1,000, because you had kings who, not all the time, there's always exceptions, but you had kings who knelt down before God, who said, yes, this is my crown, but what's on top of my crown? A cross. What is on top of this orb that I hold, which is the globe? It's the cross of Jesus Christ. And if you submit yourself to a moral order founded on the basis of Christianity, in which Christ is king, and you kneel down before that, that is a monarch that I would look to. That is a political system that I think is in tune with nature, kind of in the same way that a pride of lions has the alpha male at the top and he is running things. Not everything, like an oppressive, evil tyrant, but if we just think about the movie The Lion King, this idea of justice, of honor, and of a monarch truly humbling himself before God, that is something that should make us think, because really we should ask that of our officials in democracies as well, to kneel down, accept the fact that you are subject to a higher power and you have responsibility to not just your people, but to humanity itself. And if we do that, if we aim towards this, then I think maybe we can create a better world based on truth, beauty, goodness, and righteousness, always under the authority of the eternal King in heaven. So thank you for considering that today, and I'll see you guys in the next video.